I want to welcome you to the first in our fall 2020 webinar series is your executive leadership board and board governance strategically aligned 8 topics for assessment. Our speaker today is founder and president of Dennis Miller Associates, Dennis C. Miller. Dennis is a nationally recognized strategic leadership coach and executive search consultant with the nonprofit sector. He's got 3 decades of experience. He is a sought after speaker and a 5-time author. And so, and in addition to that, he really is a passionate advocate for nonprofits and for the important work that you do. So without further delay, I will bring Dennis in. Dennis, are you there?
I'm here, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay, well, tell me when to get that slide going and we'll get rolling.
Let's move off and let's get going and move to the next slide, please. So you can stay there for a second here. So first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. It looks like we have a nice audience from around the country. Looks like a number of members on the board and board chairs and CEOs and a host of people that in the world of philanthropy. I see my friend, I'm going to call him Dr. J. He's going to know who he is in the world of philanthropy and a bunch of other people here. So let's kind of get started here. I have this book up here, The Power of Strategic Alignment. I wrote this book, came out in 2013. And all the books I've written, and based upon my own personal experience with both obviously with life, but with my work in the sector. And I read the book because I said, what was the difference between organizations that both have wonderful causes and great people? Why do some succeed and some don't? And there was a number of reasons that I put in the book. But one of the biggest ones was I created this term, the concept of strategic alignment, which means that those organizations whose board and leadership team were completely strategically aligned behind their vision, programming, branding, philanthropy was all tied to that, behind that vision, are the ones that were successful. So today, as we move to the next slide, I want to talk about 8 different topics. What's really surrounding on the issue of, I'm going to minimize this here, 8 different topics here that deal with, is your board and are your leadership team, are you strategically aligned? So I'm going to be going through these 8 topics here. You see a mission, vision, values, and culture, strategic goals, board and CEO partnerships, executive leadership, board governance, impactful program and services, positive brand identity, and philanthropy. These are the things to me that makes an organization great, these type of things here. And the conversation we have today, you can use this in your conversation with your board members. You can use this as discussion as part of your retreats or annual weekly, or maybe not weekly, but monthly meetings here. And we certainly have an executive leadership board governance online assessment tool that you can help assess your organization to see how aligned you are. And so if we kind of move on here. One of the things I say to people is like, when your body and the mind doesn't feel aligned, your back hurts, your mind's not there, and the impact of non-alignment to yourself as a human being means. We know what happens when our car doesn't feel aligned, one of the tires wears out. Well, the same thing here in the nonprofit organizational world, and I see this more in the nonprofit world, is that we often operate in silos. We're not on the same page. And so I know from I'm not ready to admit 40 years of experience, but something close, knowing that organizations that have this fabulous partnership between their executive team and board have a few things in common, which is this. They are constantly willing to assess their own performance, each other's performance. They don't get defensive. They don't hide it. They identify and welcome to knowing their unique strengths and think that makes the soul of their organization. They're able to take a look at the areas of perhaps best practice that they could maybe do a better job on. And they're committed to making adjustments and change necessary that eventually not only benefits the organization, but at the end of the day, we're all in this business to benefit those we serve. And that's the kind of purpose of kind of today's conversation. So let's move on here. Okay. So again, I'm going to just, in each topic area, I just focus on four things. They're going to focus on six, eight, many different topics here. But um, in our survey tools, sometimes we ask you these questions, and do you strongly agree or disagree, whatever. But these again are kind of comments here, common sense, but it's just something to think about. So let's start here. It asks you certainly, does your organization have a clearly defined mission statement? Most people do. A mission statement is a relatively simple thing. It explains, what's our purpose, why do we exist, and most people kind of get that right. But if you go to the next topic about, does your organization have an inspirational vision statement that clearly articulates your future direction, that's ambitious, realistic, credible, and measurable? I'll be honest with you, almost probably 90% of the organizations we see around the country really don't have a true vision statement that meets these definitions. They have a vision statement. Sometimes it's too long. Sometimes we want every child to be self-sufficient. It's a general statement. It's almost a mission statement, but it's not inspirational and it's not measurable. Certainly, important to point out your values and your moral compass. And did you treat everybody that way? It's important. And certainly, you want to take a deep dive into your culture. Do you have a culture of success where people can feel free to express themselves? So, and their board members can express themselves, and volunteers can express themselves. But I just point this out as a starting tool, and there could be a lot of other questions here, but clearly the one that you want to think about. And these are simple questions to be asking yourselves, again, at an ongoing kind of a process here. One of the things I and my other work I do is I call the 50% rule, meaning that at every board meeting, at boards that are truly engaged and truly sense of partnership, you should have at least, on average, 50%. Sometimes it's 20, 80, whatever, but have a discussion besides your committee reports and update on the CEO report of finance and programs or philanthropy or donations, what's going on. Have a ongoing discussion about some strategic issue or a strategic challenge that you're facing, and ask people their opinions. It's a really important point here. So let's move on to the next one here. So clearly, second thing to focus on in terms of, is there strategic alignment between your leadership team and your board? And this is for you to decide. So clearly, most organizations have a strategic plan. Clearly, so you want to know, are the specific goals and is there a defined timeline, is responsibilities and agreed upon action? Sometimes there is, sometimes that's for you to decide. But as I just mentioned about in terms of the book here, one of the things to think about is the concept of strategic alignment for all of you to think about is, are you strategically aligned? Are your internal and external stakeholders, are you all focused and committed to achieving the one goal, your vision? That vision about making an impact upon those you serve. And so in the world I operate at as a leadership coach and as executive search consultant, is your organization, are everybody on the same page? Are you in silos? But is your leadership team, is your board, are your impactful programs and services, is your communication and branding strategy and philanthropy, are they all strategically aligned to achieve your vision here? And I hope that they should be. So that's a question for you to be asking yourselves here. Clearly, does your board, obviously, periodically, I'm sure they do, update, review the strategic plan with your leadership team every couple of years, at least every year? And do they do some kind of performance training to say, and measuring, and evaluating your organization on an annual basis? Not just too many people, as you know, have strategic plans. And I tell people they start off with a sort of a sugar high, and it oftentimes ends up sitting in a shelf collecting dust and nothing gets happened. Very disappointing. So one of the things that with your strategic goals is you want to make sure that it's an ongoing focus of your organization. It's like, yes, you're dealing with today, and we all know the challenges that we have in today's world, significant challenges. At the same time, we can't get lose sight of tomorrow. So that's a focus here. We go to the next one, Michelle. So I'm a strong believer in a board CEO partnership, and I'll explain this a little bit. Clearly, in terms of if I look at the life cycles of board governance, I view them having 4 life cycles. As you all know, the first cycle of any board is being a founding board. Someone starts the organization, somebody's son or daughter gets sick, someone starts a school, someone starts a theater. It's fascinating when you understand, the origins of Make-A-Wish, how that got founded, how Sushi Komen for the Cure got founded. It's fascinating, this discussion about how they all got started with just one person a decision that somebody made here. And then boards obviously, have the role of fiduciary responsibility, which is a legal requirement of overseeing compliance and finances and policies. Boards have a third stage of, sort of being a strategic advisor, business advisor. But those stages are sort of passive. I mean, at the end of the meeting, most people sort of then see, I'll see it next month's meeting. They don't have a chance to really, sometimes not socialize or get to know each other. But a highly successful organization, that from my experience, is when the board and the CEO a sense of partnership. And so what's at stake here is, in asking yourselves, is there a partnership, and are you steering the organization together towards your plan? That's a question for you. From the board's perspective, in that partnership, is your CEO or executive director, are they demonstrating the skills and competencies, that are needed today compared to yesterday, about being a visionary thinker, a relationship builder, collaborate, inspirational motivator? There's a lot of competencies that one needs to have today to succeed compared to yesterday. So the question becomes, is the board chair, I think one of the biggest jobs of the board chair, or you may use the term board president. Throughout the presentation, I use CEO versus executive director and board chair versus board president. Are they working behind the scenes with other board members to make sure that everybody's on the same page when you need a vote at the board meeting? You don't want to not know what the vote's going to be. And certainly in a good board and CEO partnership, the question becomes, is everybody getting involved in annual evaluation of the CEO and discussing goals for the CEO for the upcoming year, or is it just your executive committee, or is it just your board chair? And again, if you go onto our website, denniscmiller.com, we have tools that do both board evaluation of the CEO and a CEO self-evaluation. But it's important. My point here is not just that you have it, but that the whole board plays a role. And certainly your board chair is going to play a more prominent role because he or she is involved with your CEO more than anybody else is. But I see a lot of organizations that leave this evaluation process solely to the CEO, to the board chair, or solely sometimes the executive committee. And, you need to get everybody's opinion. So that's kind of the stuff about board CEO partnership. Do you have a good one or not? Next. So then the question really becomes about executive leadership. And when I say executive leadership, I mean both the CEO, but sort of the entire team here. So clearly one of the things that as a board you want to know is your CEO trusted and respected by other members of his or her team? And do you have a positive relationship with them? It's a part of the process that one should be going through. One of the best ways of dealing with that is really having a 360 evaluation of the CEO. So not only is it the CEO given his or her self-evaluation, and the board's given an evaluation based upon agreed upon goals that was established the previous year, but it's really important to get some feedback to say, how is your CEO being viewed by other members of the team? And it's certainly anonymous. It's important to know. Because it can be a problem. And then the certainly question is something to ask yourselves, right? Is your CEO performing an annual evaluation of each member of his or her team, and how they create a collaboration with other team members? So those are two things that are really important in assessing your strategic alignment issues here. The other thing that's really important with your executive leadership team is that everybody in the organization, do they have individual annual goals, and are they tied into the organizational goals? It's really important that that's the whole purpose of alignment, the concept of strategic alignment. Are you aligned? Okay. And you can ask yourselves, and the intent here is to kind of be provocative and have some discussion for you and your own organizations here, but it's really important is everybody aligned here? I go back, in my first 25 years of my career was in the medical field. If people don't know my background, I was president of 2 medical centers. I was also a corporate executive. I was a young CEO. I was a CEO of one of the major medical centers at the age of 38. And when I was president of this other medical center, I inherited a place that had serious problems. And besides financial problems and everything else, was there just was a real lack of customer patient satisfaction, patient service. And I had to just make sure everybody understood their role and the role they played in it, regardless of what position they had. And we really tied individual goals to annual goals, and it's a much better way of going here. Another key part that is missing today, unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, is your organization planning today? Are you identifying and developing new leaders in your organization today? Now, I talk about a comprehensive succession plan. What a lot of people hear leadership succession, they're thinking just at the CEO level only. When I talk about leadership, by the way, I'm referring to everybody in the organization that has some management responsibility of anybody, whether it's a department or a person. So the titles of supervisor, manager, director, assistant director, all people leadership. When I say leadership, I'm not talking about the top 5 people in the organization. And so the question really for all of you too is that, is there a plan in place today? Are you identifying leaders, or every time someone leaves the organization, do you have to go out and recruit somebody? And even though, we have a thriving executive search business, you shouldn't have to. Certainly for most businesses, you should be able to try to be developing leaders within yourself here. It's very productive. It's rewarding. People feel there's a path forward here. It saves you a lot of money. But every time someone moves you around the organization to go out and Indeed and look for another director of community outreach or something, it's not necessary. If you appropriately identify the positions in your organization, the competencies those positions need to have, the goals for them. And so how do you train people internally here? And it's relatively easy to do. And there's a lot, again, free information on our website. Next, Michelle. So there's some questions for you as board members and CEOs here today. But one is that I'm asking a question as a statement. They're not a question, but as a statement. And it really is for you to ask is that, does the board have a sense of ownership? And are they providing the partnership with your CEO and asking the right questions and putting forth new ideas and new challenges? That is a strategic partnership where they're constantly refreshing and renewing the organization. Or is it just, board members that's all in favor, say aye, and the only thing you want them for is to get your budget approved and things approved. That's all you want. It's a long road to success when that's how you operate as a board here. That you're not utilizing the talents of your board here. And so, I used to have this silly saying. I guess I got a lot of silly sayings for people that know me. They've heard them already. But prior to, and I hate to tell you, I existed before the email systems and internet. But we used to send out board packages in the mail with a rubber band on it. And I used to remind myself, the rubber band theory of board members. Someone would park their car before they come to the board meeting and unload the package and take the package out and take the rubber band off the package. And what was there? It was the minutes and the agenda. And they start reviewing it on the way into the meeting. And they get into the room and they don't say anything. And maybe their second emotion, they're happy that next month they'll appear in the minutes for executive. But that's not governance. That's just watching. Okay. Again, you also want to, the question here is your board structured in your meetings so that you have the 50% rule? Are you just giving updates and you're asking people just to say yes or no? Or are you actually trying to outreach and engage them in a conversation about issues? And here's an example. Could you imagine, I'm not saying you have to do this at the beginning of the meeting, but certainly at the end of the meeting, but imagine something like this here. I want to call the meeting to order. All in favor? Okay. I have approval for minutes of last meeting. Approval, all in favor, say aye. Okay, jump up. Today on first thing on an agenda, before we get into our community, we're going to talk about what's our image in the community? And let's have a discussion about what do we know about our image? Well, how about this? What's the value we provide to our community? What's the value we provide? And you all know this quite well. There's always 2 people on the board that between you and me never shut up. And there's 2 people that don't say anything. And it's our job and your job as board chair, board president, CEO, and everything to make sure people are heard. How often are your board meetings structured that way that you're engaging and asking for conversations, not just, listen, committee reports are important. If you have a strong board and you have a strong committee structure and the committee is doing its job, it's great. Now, I'm not diminishing it at all. Though I have seen organizations that have sometimes more committees than I have board members. There's just a committee for everything. But the question is, at your board meetings, are people leaving and feeling refreshed and confident, or are they leaving like, oh my God, that was a hellish meeting? Now, another thing that's very important in terms of boards and executive teams are strategically aligned is board recruitment. Um, in the course I created, it's on our website, How to Become a High Performing Nonprofit Board. There's tools to teach every aspect about boards and board performance and how you can make adjustments here. But one of them is in board recruitment. And so I'm just comment upon it. Typically, there's nothing wrong at all with recruiting people when someone knows. It's important. It's like nice to have collegiality, colleagues on the board, nothing wrong with that. Well, but most people focus first on skills. We don't have a lawyer, we don't have a CPA, we don't have a nurse, we don't have a doctor, we don't have this, we don't have that. I would suggest to you, and it's part of the work I do, to think about if you were building an ideal board matrix today, and said to yourself, what are the ideal competencies, not skills? Now, competencies to me mean things like this: inspirational leadership, brand builder, strategic thinker, entrepreneur, change agent. That to me is a competency. Skills are, financial reporting, communications, knowledge of social technology and all that stuff here. What are the ideal competencies you'd like to have? And then what are the competencies you have today on your board? And the gap should become your focus of priority. So if hypothetically speaking, and I'm just doing this as an example here, your one gap is, say, a strategic thinker. And then when you're talking to people on your board, you're talking to people in your community, you're talking to people at your chamber of commerce, you're talking to people at the local colleges, you're talking to the business community. Hey, listen, I'm on the board of so-and-so. We're looking for someone to join the board, but really looking for someone who's a strategic thinker. Anybody come to mind that you think about? And people might give a few names. So let's assume, down to you have 3 potential names that are pretty, and you talk to them and you get a sense of who they are. But one of them, by chance, happens to be a CPA. Well, if that's something you don't have now, you're not only meeting a skill need, but you've met the competency need. Too often we focus just on the skills, skills is what you learn on the job. How to be one, it's important. But competencies is how well you do the skill you've learned. So in terms of asking yourself again, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it's just how I do things, is your organization strategically aligned together with your board leadership team? In one way, it's really is about recruiting based upon ideal competencies. Also, something else is that one of the things that information is available to you, but ongoing board training is a must. It's interesting how to be on most states, be on a school board there's required training, and I don't know of any state that requires training to be on a nonprofit board, and we all know there needs to be. And it's not as a negative thing at all. It's just that most board members I know, they want training. They desire training, but we're somehow, as executives, we're afraid to ask them for training because we think we're going to be insulting them. And yet it's really kind of what they want, versus just kind of, most times, unfortunately, people go into a board meeting or a boardroom and they just look what are other people observing, and they're just sitting around and listening and maybe raise a hand occasionally. That's what people do. But a key to building your board going forward is to identify board leadership succession and how to identify that going forward. And there's a whole process that's available to you. You can take a look at us and information we have on our website again. But that's something that most people have difficulty with. And there's reasons why there's difficulty. There's reasons no one wants to be on the board because it's too complicated, it's too bureaucratic, it was not structured right. At the same time, it can be structured so that it's really rewarding to be the board chair, board president, and the people want to assume that position here. So in terms of board governance, we talked about executive leadership and goals, and certainly values, mission, and vision. These are kind of important discussions to have internally with yourself here. So we can go to the next slide, Michelle. Well, again, impactful programs and services. Today more than ever before, and you've heard the word, outcomes, and usually people talking about outcomes are former grantors who don't have the money to give you, so they want to ask about your outcomes. I'll be honest, appreciate my humor here. But certainly some of the things they ask you about is that, as a board and leadership team, is that Are you generating positive and measurable impact in your community? How is that? How about that as a board meeting discussion? I want to call the meeting today's order. Okay, after the last committee meeting, I want to talk about how do we generate positive and measurable impact in our community? How are we doing it? How do we know? Whether what those behavior healthcare, children and family services, intellectual development disabilities, education, social environment, criminal justice, whatever. Do you discuss at your board and leadership meetings? Do you discuss the impact your programs are having on and the key achievements on a regular basis? I remember once, a long time ago, I'm going to say 15 years ago, I started my company 16 years ago. And I asked to do a workshop or sort of retreat for an organization just in the world of philanthropy. And I remember asking them and I didn't know anybody except maybe one person I did work for one of my board members. I said, could you tell me your top achievements for the past year? I swear to God, it was incredible how no one had any idea, couldn't communicate it. So another big part of impactful programs is that how well does the board and leadership team collaborate and discuss the possibilities? Are you talking about adding a new program? Are you talking about eliminating a program or enhancing a program, expanding a program? Certainly today, the challenges that we're all facing and you're all facing, and I should say up front, thank you for all the work that you do with the challenges we have, because I truly believe the nonprofit sector is the glue that keeps our society together when the marketplace doesn't do it or doesn't care. But how as a board and leadership team, how are you not just getting updated about how many visits you had and how many people you've seen and things like that and how big we've gone and more visits? It's fine. It's a good sign. But how are you evaluating your program service? Are you having an impact or you're not having an impact? Last but not least here is I remember years ago being at a conference and the president of the bank turned to me and said, I can't even say his name. His name is Kevin Cummings, in East Coast. He's president of Investors Bank. Very great guy, philanthropic. The organization very supports the community. He said, Dennis, why don't these people ever collaborate? Because we have like 8 kids for cancer programs in the state, and it's like, so one of the things that executives and board in their strategic alignment discussion be are you considering collaboration? If you're certainly involved in mental health services, are you also talking possibly to affordable housing organizations collaborating? Are you talking with job training? I can go on and on here, but other similar organizations with a shared goal. It's not just being able to sort of do something together or have a conversation, but really honest collaboration. It's what people need, and too oftentimes I find that clients and organizations are sort of focused on their own self and not interested in other people. But just something to think about as you talk about programs and services. Are you collaborating? Are you enhancing it? I don't want to. Today is beyond discussion of getting into mergers, and merger sounds like murder. Everybody gets scared to death of it, but that's another day coming up in our calendar of webinars. Michelle, if you can. Well, your question about positive brand identity is that, and I know all of you know this here. I mean, brand identity was mostly in the for-profit sector for a long time, and brands and logos. But branding is more than just a logo and your name. It's not my job to change the organization's name, but I think in the past 16 years, and out of 400 clients, I think we did recommend 2 name changes because they were talking about more about what they did, but they weren't inspirational names. But here's something to think about for you in your meetings. Does your organization have a unique brand? Can you clearly articulate what distinguishes you from another organization? I find it amazing how, even whether it's in mission statements or vision statements, it's hard sometimes to tell the difference between the YMCA, the United Way, this organization for girls, this organization for boys. Hard to distinguish themselves. And it's a challenge, but it's a reality today in today's world. You need to distinguish yourself. And how does that distinguishing articulate and communicate? And how does it create brand awareness and motivate your team? and your team is not just your staff, but it's your board, donors, and volunteers and everything. So that's a question for you to consider: is how do you have a unique brand, and how do you distinguish yourself from other people? Another thing is that how do you use in terms of uh, on your website alone? I mean, I think it's in today's world, I think it's more important than ever before to have those you serve, if they can, if those you serve will actually speak on your behalf. How many of you have right on your homepage of your website have a video with someone who's benefiting from your organization, has a 1 minute video talking about who they are and thanking them, appealing to people's hearts and minds? How well do you, through your social media platforms, or how do you communicate, you know, your mission and values, your achievements? We just talked about it before, the positive impact you're having in the community. How do you, or you're just listening, here's who we are, we've been in business for 40 years, we have these programs, if you need us, call our help number. It's okay, it's informational. But today, none of us went into this business. Nobody went into this business I know of, looking to tout their horn. The world that we work in our executive search practice, we see, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands actually, that, people who went into because of the social changes in the 60s and 70s and wanted to make a difference in the world. And those people, baby boomers are retiring. And also today, a lot of people that are in the leadership sector just don't have the new skill sets and need. But I just don't see how well people sort of are communicating their successes. It's important. So these are some things to think about for you here. Is there a plan to market and communicate to all your internal and external stakeholders? How do you communicate to them? Do you have some kind of email system? Is it all the things that I didn't know never existed? Is that something that may have taken place here in your communication marketing plan? So I think it's really important to have. How do you communicate your organization and what distinguishes you? It's also, I think it's very important for organizations to put on their website, not just their executive team members, but put on their board members and the professional backgrounds. You don't put their email system and how to get a hold of them. That's not what you're here for. But your board is part of your brand. And it's something that you should be thinking about. So, I believe it's important to show not only your leadership team and photos, but I think it's also important to show your board. It's all part of building your brand and what distinguishes yourself here. And the same thing else here. How often at a board meeting, at any meeting, when you walk into, if you have a lobby, even in virtual meetings, how often are you discussing your achievements and results? And if we're not communicating as a leader and as our board, if we're not communicating our successes, we're only hurting ourselves. Now, no, my point was before I missed it. Nobody went into this business, again, to tout our horn. It wasn't what it is. And so a lot of us is, so even like when Michelle introduced me, I'm a little, believe it or not, even though I'm not a shy guy, not spoken, but I would rather have Michelle introduce me than myself. I just feel awkward to introduce myself and all the things I got hanging around my letters and everything. But it's important that I can talk about what our firm does, what we do with our clients. So you might think this is poo-poo and not important, but it's very important in the world we work in today, is to focus in on just as much as in finance is important and world of philanthropy is important and all the things we talk about, board leadership, branding and building a positive brand is very important. So the question for all these here is, how do you as a board and leadership, how do you collaborate on this stuff here? Michelle, we can move on to the next one here. Philanthropy. Everybody end of the day, wants to talk about philanthropy. So the question becomes is not only has your organization or does your organization, do you have a comprehensive fundraising plan? What does that mean? It's amazing when I ask people, do you know how much money just U.S. citizens give annually? And people, I don't know, like 3 million, 3 billion, 3 trillion. What do you think? I said, what do you think? So I even ask you, what do you think total U.S. giving is, say, even last year? What's total U.S. giving? $450 billion. 450 billion. How much of that's coming to you? But it's interesting is, where does the money come from? Most people think the money comes from corporations and foundations. You probably get maybe, of the 450 billion, maybe about 5%, 10% maximum comes from corporations. Maybe another 10% maybe comes from foundations, and maybe another 10%, and it varies, 10 to 5, comes from, bequest. So someplace 30% of total giving comes from someplace between bequest, foundations, corporate giving, but 70% of total giving in the US alone comes from individuals. And generally that's where most organizations do poorly at in the idea of raising money. And so it's important not just to have a plan of action, but how are we doing that? So I want to talk about a couple of things here. And this is for you, again, to have these conversations here. I think having conversations, again, as I started, there's strong organizations who have conversations. It's not a threat. It's not a criticism. None of the things I'm talking about today are criticism. It's just an observation for you from someone who's got a few years of experience and has done this myself as a CEO and as a board chair, and advise other people to do this around the country. So remember I talked about the board workshop I just did recently, and I asked people the top achievements. It really was a workshop supposedly on fundraising. And I'll never forget this. This is a true story. I've written about this in my books. If you see my webinar, sometimes it's in it, but it's in my online courses. But when I asked them if they could tell me their top 2 achievements, there was silence, and one person said, we did our budget on time. And I had to keep a straight face because I didn't want to be disrespectful. And I was like, wow, okay. Anybody else? I'm like, really? And someone said, we only spend so much money on fundraising. I'm like, really? Okay, wow, wonderful achievements. I'm like, oh my God. And finally, a woman in the back of the room said, we do a program, Dennis, called PALS, P-A-L-S. I said, what is that? She says, it stands for Peace, an Alternative Learning System. She says, we treat children who, this was a domestic violence sexual assault organization for women and children, and there was some men. And said, we treat children who've been subjected to trauma. And so they can have, healthy relationships again with either parent surrogates or people in school, maybe the same parents or classmates. And they're going to say, Grand Slam home run, bottom line, winning the World Series. What an achievement. That's amazing. How do you communicate that? He said, honestly, we don't do a good job. I said, because that's why you're not raising any money. So one of the things that's important to ask these questions is the following here. And again, when I ask people, why do people give money? And again, most of this information is more of it is, is on our website, and I'm happy to have a free conversation with you. But yes, people give. The number one reason people give money is because someone asked them. That's just a fact. Someone asked them. They asked them by a phone call. They asked them in person. They asked them an email. They asked them a text message. People ask them. And yes, people give to someone they trust and respect. And yes, they give because they want to make a difference in the world. And some people give because it's a tax contribution. But there's 2 reasons that are dramatically different over the past 10 years, particularly since the recession of 2008 or 9. People give to success, not to distress. They want to give the money where there's going to be return on their investment. They don't want to give just because you lose the money. So the question is, if it's true, and it is, that people give to success, then how well do you communicate that success? As we talked about, branding, right? And communications and values. How do you communicate your success? How do you measure your success? I do, less lately. It's mostly on Zoom, but board retreats, Zoom board retreats. I do board retreats all over the place. Ask them, what do you do? What's your success? What are your achievements? Most people don't know. So it's really important for you to have discussion clearly about the board's role and understanding about that people give to success, not just distress. And certainly the other thing people give to is they give to the needs of those you serve, not your organizational needs. I know it sounds like wordsmithing, but remember, people give to the needs of those you serve, not your organizational needs, and they give to your success, not your distress. So if you're out there sort of begging with money, when I was a little boy, my mom took me occasionally into New York City to see maybe a Christmas show with my brothers and at the Radio City Music Hall, and went to the bus terminal. Who was up outside the bus terminal was always this disheveled-looking guy, selling pencils, sitting on a cardboard box and selling pencils in a tin cup. Think of it as begging, but it's the reason most of you, I know if I'd ask you directly how many of you as board members, or even CEOs would rather stick pins in your eyes or have a root canal to raise money, most of you would say yes. It's unnatural. It's filled with risk and rejection. But not if we start talking about the impact we're having on those we serve, and is it worth investing in them? Then it's just a matter of measuring up our values. So when you're asking questions again about all these topics, and you're asking yourself these questions, whether it's through our online survey tools, or you're doing it through a retreat, or you're doing it at your board meetings, about are we strategically aligned? Is our board and leadership team aligned on these issues here? And are you aligned about communicating your success and achievements and the needs of those you serve? And certainly when you're communicating to potential new board members, do you bring up the idea that one of the expectations that they'll make an annual contribution, maybe subject to the ability to pay, or do you just close it down and don't bring it up because you're afraid that the one vacancy you have that's been vacant for a year will remain vacant? The last piece here of today's presentation is on the philanthropy is this concept of a tri-partnership between the three parties, the CEO, the Chief Development Officer, and the board, and understanding the role they play. So let me go over a couple of things here, if you don't mind here. Sort of a three-legged stool, and the stool is only strong as each leg here. So the annual, believe it or not, the annual tenure of a Chief Development Officer or Development Director in our country, in the nonprofit world right now, is about 2 years, 18 months actually. Now, there are people that stay 18 years, but there are people that stay 18 days. And what often happens is that we hire a Chief Development Officer and then we say, geez, hey, 6 months, how is Sally or Sam doing? They bring in any money? I don't know. And so, but it's like, they think development is like a department, like, where's development office? So it's third floor next to quality assurance. It's a culture. And so the role of a CEO, he or she needs to be the chief sales officer. The CEO stands for Chief External Officer today, right? It's the chief communication, the chief relationship person. It's the chief storyteller, the chief brand builder. That's what I want the CEO to do, to be the lead person that people in the community know who they are, and they're branded and recognized as the head of that organization. As all of you know, in the for-profit world, where I spent, part of my career, early days, the chairman of the board of and CEO is the same person, and that's who's branded. Whether GM or IBM or wherever they be, Apple, it's all the people that the person is. The role of the board is different from, in my world, is there's a million books and a million conferences and webinars on fundraising, and you wonder why, but everybody still struggles. Why is that then? If everybody has so many books and conferences, why do people still struggle? Because I want my client's board to understand that I don't want them asking anybody for money. And that sounds like a shock, but because they're not trained well. Some people could do it well, and some of you can do it well. But most people would ask for too little, accept too little. I want my board, instead of asking, I want them to commit to me at least three types of potential donors: an individual, a family, a corporation, or a foundation. Can you help me cultivate 3 relationships in a year? Just 3. 5 would be ideal, but 3 would be wonderful. So if I have 10 people on my board, now which my chief development officer, I'll get their responsibility in a second. I want my board to say, I'm willing to help open up a door and build a relationship. And I could just want them to say, meet at breakfast, meet the CEO, go on a tour, maybe be my guest at a gala, be it something. Just get to know the place. And I want my chief development officer to be the one that's going to educate and link between my board and my CEO, who provides education, but follows up on those and has this plan. But I'll, as a CEO, if I need to, I'll do the one asking. Well, the chief, I could do the asking. I want my board just to help cultivate relationship, and I want them to make it a gift where they can look in the mirror and say, you know what, I gave them. I don't care if it's $100, $1,000. I don't care what the number is. But this idea that I give my time on my board, I don't give my money. I won't give you a penny, nor anybody else here. So it's really important when you are discussing strategic relationships again, the strategic advisement of the board here. In order to be successful in cultivating new donors, you have to have this tribe partnership, okay? I've done other webinars, I've written about it, books about it, everything else like this. So when your board and CEO understands their role with the development officer, you have this tribe partnership, you're gonna start to have a culture of philanthropy like you never had before. So let's go to the next slide, Michelle, if we can, please. And so, and before we get to this here, so we covered a lot of topics. We covered a lot of topics of certainly, mission, vision, and goals. We talked about strategic goals. We talked about executive leadership, board governance, positive branding. We talked about collaboration. We talked about positive branding with philanthropy. So a couple of things here. I don't want to make this is not a selling tool, but for you, if anybody's new to us, we work around the country. We have partnerships all over the country. Go to our website, but Dennis C. Miller. If you don't put the C in, I swear to God, this is not just a joke. There's actually a furniture store in Brooklyn called Dennis Miller Associates. So go online. Our services are very affordable. We have an executive leadership and board governance online assessment tool, which is not only where both sides can give an evaluation of what's going on, but it's confidential, and we also give you actually written recommendations and an hour worth of conversations of what's going on. I mentioned previously the CEO evaluation tool, leadership assessment tools. For $1 a day, $1 a day, you can help build your leadership team in your entire organization, assess them and develop them through a program. We have online board and executive leadership courses that probably cost you $2.60 a day for your entire 25-person board, and on and on. So I would encourage you to take a look at what we have and what we've developed. We have a fabulous team of people. Everybody on our team, and it's our team, been in the nonprofit sector as either CEO, board chair, chief strategy officer, head of philanthropy, all kind of organizations here. And so I hope now we can get to and take some questions, Michelle, but I want to give a little overview of Dennis C. Miller. I also want people to say, as Michelle said, not only will you get a copy of the presentation, but anybody that's on the call today who would like a free 30-minute, and I don't count the clock, a 30-minute conference call with me at any date and time that you prefer. I'm certainly a busy guy, but I will have to do it. If you would like a free 30-minute consultation with me, I don't care if it's just yourself or you want to bring 8 people on the call, I don't care. Send me an email, dennis@denniscmiller.com. I'm happy to do it. So Michelle, let's see, do we have any questions so far?
Well, I did get a couple of questions. One is kind of a question plus a follow-up. So you spent, a lot of time today talking about the signs of a strategically aligned organization. If someone were in their organization and they're maybe not sure if they're aligned properly, what might be some clues to look for that they maybe have to pay attention to this?
Okay, it's a good question, but it's a little board question. So I don't know whether the person is a board member or leadership team, but that's not strategic aligned. So a couple of things come to mind. One is that if, let's say it's a board member, let's just say it is, that's for conversation for someone that, not the CEO. That's a conversation that the board president, board chair, or their friend and colleague should have kind of a conversation with. It's certainly if it's a member of the CEO's team or leadership team, I mean, that's certainly for a CEO conversation. Clearly, ideally, it would come out in their annual performance evaluation. If you also did a 360 evaluation on everybody on your team,
Mhm.
it'll come out the best way to find out how people are feeling, if they're feeling that we're on the same page. Listen, there are a lot of people who work together very well. There are a lot of people that think only of themselves, and I don't have to mention any names publicly here right now, but there's a lot of people working in silos, and they're not really a team player, and that's going to drag you down. So clearly, I would look for performance evaluation, but I'd look for feedback from other people that work with them. And I think if you find feedback or have a chance to discuss with colleagues, say, listen, I'm going to give you an example. So I'm just making something up here. So I'm going to pick on somebody with the name of Jane. So let's say Jane. And so if you think it may be Jane, is Jane really aligned here? She really, on board with us here? You might have a conversation with two or three people that Jane speaks to. It could be Jim, and say, listen, hey, how you and Jane, is Jane, what you thinking? Have a conversation. Listen, I think we only do well, and I think in my own personal experience, my own growth and development is in a way people confronted me in a positive manner. I joke that my wife for 40 years confronts me every day. I don't joke, but really, one thing, great thing about my wife is she knows how to tell me to cut it out. So I think having a conversation with people and just say, I'm observing something, feelings. Am I wrong or am I right? And have people have a conversation. That's so well, without knowing the specifics. And again, I'm happy to email me, and I'm happy to go into specifics about this person that you probably don't want to say. And so we'll take another question if we can. Michelle.
Okay, one more. In terms of assessment, you've talked a lot about different types of assessments. That can be an uncomfortable concept for a lot of people.
Yes.
What are some things that an organization can do, either at the board level or the executive level, to help people understand assessment as a positive thing, as something that's
Yeah,
going to help make the organization better?
yeah. The person who's asking this question is brilliant. This is a question that we deal with all the time. It's just, I wrote an article recently about the nonprofit CEO dilemma: how to ask my board to improve their performance. Everybody sort of has a tendency to think, even with my course, how to become a high performing board or high performing team, people are like, what do you mean I'm not high performing? I think that if you're always truly focusing on the mission of your organization, if you're really focusing on your mission, not on yourself, your mission, and about those you serve, you have an obligation to take a look at how are we doing things compared to supposedly some best practices. And so I think in any form of assessment, it should never be used as a tool for, being critical or coming down on somebody. But there's no way we can grow and develop unless we face our internal obstacles. And I know this factually, and it's even in my book, The Power of Strategic Alignment, is that our biggest obstacle is ourselves at times. We may have stale programs, or people are on board that stay too long here. So a couple things about assessment tools here. There are a number of them out there. You probably know many of them. I'm not going to mention any names, but there's one of them out there that's used a lot. But all you do is you just get a score. You get a score. You're a 3.2 compared to your other organizations that they do, and it's a 3.1, so you feel good about yourself. But you don't know nothing about what the other organizations do. There are assessment tools that kind of give you just a simple questionnaire, 1 to 5. We offer two forms. The long form of assessment, we actually talk to people individually, now on Zoom, but we actually talk to people confidentially and get a feeling for what's going on. That's a fascinating tool that I've learned for 15 years now. But in our assessment tool, it's confidential for one. And so you get a couple of perspectives. It's not just the board assessing itself, but the leadership and the board assess the organization, but it assesses itself on all those 8 categories we just talked about. And so when you get a report back and it says, everybody agrees that we either have a strong strategic planning process or we don't. It's room for discussion here, but assessment should never be personal, but we have to overcome, and it's a real issue. We should have to overcome the fear of wanting for self-examination, because self-examination leads to stifleness and doesn't lead to growth. So it takes courage to bring up the concept of assessment, of performance review. Yes, boards are volunteers. They put the time in. It's like, I want to be evaluated like a hole in the head here. But really, you know what? If you're on the board, you know, you have responsibility and accountability. And if you're on the leadership team, you're being paid here. So it's a great question. I wish I had all the answers because I run up against every day in our practice. But the best way to say it is to put in the point of view of just, we want to learn. Is there ways we can do to be better? And at the end of the day, if being better in one form or another helps those we serve, we're better off. So that's how I focus it. This can be a way to not only get better for ourselves, but be better for those we serve. And I'll tell you something else what's interesting. Board members who go through some form of training, so they actually, most of them come back and like it, and it's enlightening, and they feel more connected. What we do sometimes, we think, oh, they're not going to like it. Don't even bring up the topic about an assessment tool because they think it's being used as self-criticism, and it's not. So I'll leave it at that. Do you have anything else, Michelle?
I got one more question. The other questions will relate to getting a copy of the presentation. And I just want to remind everybody that yes, we will circulate a recording that will include the slides. But the final question has to do with board development. For organizations that, you know, where they're volunteers and the organization itself is kind of strapped for time because of, you know, the work that they do, and especially, you know, the increased need for their services right now. What are some suggestions you might have for incorporating board development into their schedule?
Yeah, a couple of things. It's a great question again, a fabulous question. And again, I'm happy to talk to this person or individual in this group, you know, offline here. But board education should be ongoing part of being on the board. So it shouldn't be like a one-time, once-a-year retreat deal. But certainly a couple of things that should be done easily. I mean, you can have invite members of the board to our free webinars or other free webinars that deal with board issues. Have a discussion, have a guest speaker at a board meeting. But I think it's important to have an ongoing process of board education on all the issues here, because I think boards want to be apprised of it. So it's not something you have to do like just all in one dump. Our online course, which is relatively, you'll see they're all relatively inexpensive. Our online course for how to become a high performing board, sort of a board chair's guide to success, is actually a license for a year. It's not a one-time deal. So you have a course, an online course you can take at your home, on your mobile app, on your phone, in your office, whatever. And you can take the course and then, but in segments, even if you spend, I have a client that take, you know, they commit to 10 minutes every 2 weeks, a part of the course, just 10 minutes. So if there's 8 modules and each module has 2 topics, there's 16. So in a period of months, it's just a little bit of time for discussion. I know everybody's busy, but at the end of the day, it's like, if you use the sports analogy, you know, if you don't practice, you're not going to be a good team. If you don't practice ballet, if you don't practice your music, if you don't practice being an orator, you don't practice anything. And so it's, you know, if you don't go, I mean, if you don't train, you just can't go to medical school and become a physician. You spend years in residency and training. No one's going to want you to operate on them just because you got an A in organic chemistry. So training is part of our lives here. And I think you have to think about the concept of that. It's a newness. We have to move away from the negative to the positive. And that's what, if I try to do anything in today's session, is hopefully it's more a positive, not a negative. That only good will come out of this. And so, yes, there's people resisting it. Yes, oh my God, people feel too busy. I don't want to be, I got no time for training. Don't do that to me. You know, I'm too busy. But if you're involved with kids or adults or whatever you're involved in, the question you got to ask yourself is, you don't have any time for the kids. You have any time for the people in the senior nursing home. You don't have any time for people in the hospital. You don't have any time for people that are going through transition in life. I mean, you don't have time for it's for the you serve. You don't have time to give back a little bit. You don't have time to learn a little bit. I think we have to get a little out of ourselves a little bit, outside of our own selfishness a little bit, and be part of the team. And I think that's a big jump for all of us here. And I know it's running late. I've talked to a lot of people around the country, particularly people who in foundations, others, they really kind of start requiring, some type of training and everything. So again, Michelle, I assume there's no other questions.
No, I think that wraps it up for today.
I love the question, by the way. It's a great question. So, thank you all very much. For those I'm talking to you for the first time, welcome. For those of you that have known me before, thank you for being here. I hope to see you again. Again, Michelle, when everybody will get this out to you, recording and everything else, and please feel free to. I'm on the East Coast, so if you're in LA and you want to have a a meeting at 6 a.m. It's fine. It's 9 a.m. But if you remember, your 11 o'clock at night is my 2 o'clock in the morning. That's all. Wish you all well. Please feel free to take advantage of the free information we have on our website, DennisCMiller.com. There's a ton of free stuff. I thank you, Dr. J, as well. Thank you, Dr. J.
Take care, everyone.